Are you going to be able to take off your mask, Rabbi, or
Because I'm
no?
in the room right now, so I think I can.
Okay.
So exactly. So, but if anybody else wants to start attending my shiur, then I'll have to start putting my mask back on.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Okay.
okay. So everybody's here. Okay, good. All right. So good. So okay. So I'm going to start off of my phone. As my computer gets set up, I will transition. So apologies for the setup being less than ideal. Just trying to work out the kinks. Okay, so yesterday we were we'd spoken a lot about we'd spoken about the setup for we were talking a lot about being drunk, right? Which is a lot of an aside, but that's what we were up to. Then we finally got back to the question of renting out from the non-Jew or from a Jew in order to make your Eruv. So the issue being is that everybody who's located in the Eruv and has any say has to be part of it. You can't have somebody being in the area designated by the Eruv who is not, who has rights, who isn't part of it in some way, whether it be a Jew or a non-Jew. For the reason for the non-Jew, we just said was an Isser Midrabanan, because then you'd be in violation of you might learn from their actions, and that was the problem. And for Jews, the issue is that if somebody's not part of it, then they have usage rights to that particular location. Let's say the person in the inner court is the outer courtyard, then they're coming on through will ruin your Eruv, because you can't have somebody excluded from the Eruv unless they have said they're not part of it.
So is that also rabbinic, or is that derisa for Jews?
For Jews, that's so that gets a little sticky, because the question is is Eruvin direct or Rabbanon in general?
Right.
So
but
what
it's
level?
It's more strict amongst Jews because they just made this thing for non-Jews, lest you
Correct.
associate with them.
Correct. So
they
once
don't have any rights really. The Eruvin doesn't affect them. It's just
right.
You're nervous about them being what happens if they're there, and the interaction with them, as opposed to Jews.
Right. So I'd say the better way of putting it would be that right. So then one's like this formal Midrabanan of Eruvin, or whatever level Eruvin actually is. For me, made in time of Shlomo. Another one is Xer that's added on much later.
Yeah.
As I mentioned, that the
that's clear. Thank you.
Right. So as the Yerushalmi doesn't really, it seems to have a different idea for how the Xer D'Rabbanan works of the living with the non-Jews. They think that's based off of the non-Jews having rights. So the Yerushalmi has a different concept also. It seems to indicate that it's definitely much later, and the strength of the Isser is less. Okay. So hopefully that's clear.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay. So let's continue on. Okay, so now we're up to the point of figuring out when and from whom we were supposed to rent from when there's a non-Jew. So we had mentioned the case of here. So the last case we had was on Samech Hamid Bet. Was a question of, are you allowed to do so on Shabbos or not? So we said, is it considered? So we said, is this rental considered to be like a full kinyan? In which case you can't do so on Shabbos, or is it considered to be like being mevatel reshus when somebody negates their ability to use an area, which is only really midrabanan. So which is something that can be done even on Shabbos, and it's a lesser degree. So we discussed the question is, can non-Jews even be mevatel reshus, or is it that only Jews can do? And so. All right, so then we had Rabbi Chanina had stated in that case, so should we do it before Shabbos or on Shabbos? So Rabbi Chanina ben Yossi said that you should. Rabbi Asi Amar lo niskor. Rabbi Asi said you should not. V'amar lahu Rabbi Chia bar Abba nismoch al divrei zakein v'niskor. Right, so then Rabbi Chia said we'll rely on the words of the elder being Rabbi Chanina, and we'll rent it out from the non-Jew even though it's already Shabbos, because again the non-Jew had not been there, so they didn't think it'd be an issue. Then he showed up and they're like, oops. So like, what do we do now? So like, let's rent from him because it's only Midrabanan, and therefore they'll be lenient. Then Atu Shele le Rabbi Yochanan. So then they asked Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Lahan, Yafasitim she Sechartem. He said that's a good thing that you did, and that was the right thing to do. Tahu ban Hardai, and Hardai was wondered by this. About the fact that Rabbi Yochanan said that you should have rented. Umi Amar Rabbi Yochanan hachi. Right. So why did Rabbi Yochanan agree to that? Ha Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So Chakmar of Dami. Right. So he said that if somebody who's renting is like somebody who made an eruv, and they're basically establishing an eruv, and you can't be establishing an eruv on Shabbos. You're allowed to mevatel rishos on Shabbos, but you can't make an actual eruv once Shabbos has already set in. We said you don't do that. You can do that before Shabbos. So what happened? So my love, ma'ar b'od yom, asok b'od yom. Right. So therefore, since you're supposed to make an eruv when it's still Friday, you also should have rented for while it's still Friday. So what's going on here? Lo. Mama Ariva filo pako sheva pruta, asocher pako sheva pruta. No, the comparison is incorrect. Rather, the comparison is just like when you make an eruv. There's no the amount of value you need to use can be masna sheva pruta. Similarly, when you're renting out from a non-Jew for the purposes of solving the issue of the non-Jews' rights to the object. It's similar rights to the courtyard. Similarly, you can use a value less than a pruta, which again, for Jews, normally this is a bad transaction, but for non-Jews, this is always considered to be a valid transaction. Mama arv afilu schir l'kito, asocher afilu schir l'kito. Just like when you do making an eruv, you don't have to have the permission of the person themselves, but even their worker, or their hired worker, or their harvester, or their sharecropper is enough. Similarly, by when you're renting it out is the same thing as well, right? You don't need to have the head of the family give the approval. As long as somebody in the household agrees, then that's sufficient. So nowadays, that's why a lot of the times you can let's say if you're just in an apartment building, you're not trying to make an error for the whole neighborhood. So if you rented it out from the superintendent, or the custodian of the building, or the doorman, that's sufficient. You don't have to necessarily go and find the landlord and get him to sign off on your ability to have the eruv, as long as the somebody who has access rights to and usage rights to the building says it's okay, then that's sufficient. So what else do we learn that's how they
It's like I think nowadays, my understanding is it's like the fire department or something like that.
Correct. So nowadays
right?
Nowadays, we try and go even above that. We try and get, let's say, like the government in town, because they actually are a full representative of every single individual in the whole town.
And they have authority in an emergency to enter any house.
Correct. Right, because they're the ones on top of the fire department and the police force and everything else. So that's typically what's done. Some would argue that nowadays that's debatable about if there have been some people who try to say that doesn't work because the original basis for it was based on the fact that you did it from the ruler, and the ruler could do whatever he wanted with no restraints. Whereas nowadays there are individuals do have rights to their land to some degree, but most people are like, that's true, but you agree to give up your rights during the process of the formation of the government. So therefore, it's essentially the same thing in the end.
Right.
So that's what we rely on, and so I have yet to be the individual who's machmir who invalidates the rental sale through government yet. So.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Thank God. So we still our errors are all still up and functioning. Okay, so now we're about other things that are comparable between the different types of eruv to the non-Jew and the Jew, and how that helps us in general. So what else we learn from Rabbi Yochanan? Ma'arev chamisha sheshuri mechatzer achad, echad ma'arev adei kulan. So chernami. So just like when you do an eruv for 5 people in a courtyard, only one person needs to actually make the eruv, like formally place all the food in one area and they say the bracha and declare this is the eruv working. Similarly, when you're renting from a number of non-Jews, we only need one person to actually go through with the rental from the non-Jew, and he can rent it on behalf of everybody else. You don't need to have every single person go up to the owner of the non-Jew and say, can I rent it? Can I rent it? Can I rent it? No, it's enough to simply have one person do it. Tehei ba Rabbi Elazar. So now Rabbi Elazar is like, wait, So why does Rabbi Yochanan say what he says? So what's going on? So now he's also trying to figure it out. So it's like, that's interesting. Like, where do you get this from? So I'm Rabbi Zera, my Tihia, Rabbi Elazar. So it's like, so what do you right? Why is Rabbi Elazar going confused by this? Amar Rav Sheshes, Gavar Rabba Rabbi Zera lo yada mai Tihia Rabbi Elazar. So then the answer is, so Rav Sheshes says somebody as great as Rabbi Zera doesn't know why Rabbi Elazar is confused by the statement of Rabbi Yochanan. Kakash Shalei Shmuel Rabbi. No, the issue that he's wondering about is Shmuel has a contradictory teaching to Rabbi Yochanan. Tamar Shmuel Kol Makom She'osrim Ma'arvin Mevatlin. As Shmuel states, wherever you can, where one individual can forbid another one from using it, and therefore they're therefore in the considered to be part of the group that is allowed to make an Erev together, mevatlin. That means that every individual within the said group could be mevatel rishus. So, but if, right, in that situation, but ma'arvin ve'ein osrin, but if they can make an Erev, but one of the people's disagreeing would not affect the status of the Erev overall, or osrin ve'ein ma'arvin, but if they, or if let's say the person's usage would forbid the others from making an Erev, would forbid the others, but would not allow for the usage of an Erev and mevatlin. Then you can't. And the person could not make an Erev. So basically, you need to have both able to forbid the other individuals from using the area, as well as have the possibility of being ar with them in order to have bittul rishus to negate your rights. So that would mean that we have the problem here with a non-Jew, which seems to indicate that doesn't work, right? So, and then what's the example of where you could? Kol makom she'osrim ma'arvin mevatlin kigon shtei chaserot zo lifnei mizu. And where is the case where you both would forbid if you didn't make an Erev, and you are allowed to make an Erev with other individual, and therefore you're allowed to be mevatel rishus? This is when there are two courtyards, one inside of the other one. So therefore, people in the inner courtyard must pass through the outer courtyard. So that's that case. So, but ma'arvin and osrin, what case is that? Where you can make an Erev, but it wouldn't forbid the others from using their own courtyard, and therefore you can't be mevatel rishus. That's if you have two different courtyards, and they have a single opening between them. So therefore, they're not necessarily going to go out through the other one. It's not like one has to cross the other one. Rather, they share a common doorway, so they could go from one to the other, but they don't necessarily have to make an Erev from one chatzer to the other chatzer, and therefore we don't let them do bittul rishus because so that's that case because it's not necessarily getting in the way. So what's the case of osrim and marvin, and therefore and involved? What's the case where they forbid each other, and you're not allowed to make an error between the two cases, and therefore nobody can do bittul rishus? So the question. So now that's the last case. So where's the case of somebody who would make you unable to have your eruv, but there's no way of solving it via bittul? So who is this? Latuye mai, lav latuye goy, is a person who ruins your eruv, and there's no way for him to use bittul. That must be a non-Jew. So, and what just happened there? I think I just lost. Okay. Oh, I just lost connection. Okay. That's what I get for using my computer. 1 second. One moment while my computer reloads itself. Yeah. So the question is, which is the case where who could forbid? There we go. Okay. 1 second. No, just somehow I managed to no, because I used my internet browser and then it refreshed itself, which then sorry. It refreshed itself and then I didn't have Wi-Fi, so now I'm just pulling up a different from my desktop. 1 second. That's what I get for not using a hard copy Gemara. Sorry about that, everybody.
Are you in the base Midrash?
I am the Midrash, yeah.
Isn't there one on the shelf?
There is one on the shelf. Just I find it easier to use just because like I'm holding multiple things, so it's easier for me to do it with
whatever works.
It's a case of bittul Eruvin.
Very good.
That is. Here we go. Right. So so what's the case where you're not like the case must be a non-Jew, right? The non-Jew is the case where he can't do bittul because again we said bittul is a unique feature only the Jews are allowed to do, and yet he authors the eruv, as Rashi says, "Shadarim shnei Yisraelim b'chatzer shosfrin otan shnei Yisraelim ze al ze ve'en yocholan la'arev b'shvil hanachri v'karminan de'en mevatlin." Because this is all according to the opinion that non-Jews are not allowed to do bittul, because it's only Jews have the concept of bittul. Non-Jews, they think that it's weird to simply negate the existence of something that's right in front of you, and therefore it doesn't work for them. Which, to be fair, makes perfect sense. I mean, which is reasonable within their logic. Because I mentioned before, non-Jews are afraid of our hocus pocus magic that we do. So we want to make sure that we're not, freaking them out too much with our magic spells. So therefore, we don't give them rights to do magic, because if we did, well, they'd think we're going to kill them with the magic spell that we're trying to involve them in for Shabbos. So therefore, we can't do that. So maybe it's the case of the non-Jew, and that's why the case where he would forbid, but therefore you can't do bittul anymore. So now the question then is the ida ata me'etmol logar me'etmol, and if the non-Jew had shown up yesterday, right? So then you could have rented it from yesterday. And why are we calling that a case of osrin then, right? Rashi says, "Amai kari lahu osrin ve'ein ma'arvin ha matzu li'orev ve'ulamegar." What do you mean you said that you can't make an eruv? We've been talking about this whole parak. We've been mentioning the fact that you could make an eruv, just you have to rent it first. So it's not a case where it's impossible to make an eruv. It's just that you just have to, think a little bit and rent before Shabbos comes in. So elalav ata b'shabta. Rather, it must be the case is where the non-Jew turning Talmud Bet is when the non-Jew shows up on Shabbos. Ilmole bittul reshut then Rashi. So alma bittul reshut lo tikun ela hecha dechazu leruve med, which implies that you're only allowed to do this. The rental is only valid before Shabbos. You can't rent from a non-Jew on Shabbos. Because since we said that you can't be ma'are, anything that you could do on Shabbos, right? Meaning, like if you say that socher is ke ma'arev, that means that a rental is like making an eruv. That's the problem, because you can't make an eruv on Shabbos. But if we say that socher is like bittul, then you could. The issue here is that we're saying that non-Jews can't do bittul. Therefore, it must be that this rental you're doing from the non-Jew is like you're actually making the eruv on Shabbos, which we can't let you do. So that's the problem. So therefore, if you wanted to rent from the non-Jew, you must, and therefore solve the issue of living with the non-Jew in your courtyard, you must have done it before. If you didn't, then we've got a problem. Uktani osrin ve'en ma'arvin and mevatlin shramina. And that's why it says that they are that the case where if you are not allowed to make an eruv, where they forbid you, and you make an eruv. So that's the case of. So somebody's coming in. So let me just. Here we go. So that's the scenario, right? The non-Jew shows up on Shabbos, and that's what creates the issue. Amar Rav Yosef lo shmiya li hashmatata. Rav Yosef says, I've never heard of that. Right? Which didn't hear of. Rashi fills this in. Dishmuel da Amar shtei chatzerot zilifnei mizu sheyuchal levatel drisat raglam luchitzona. So he says that the thing that started the whole discussion of that, right? That Shmuel said that he hadn't heard. So Amar le Abaye at Amar nihalan. Now, but Abaye says again, this is the issue that at some point Rav Yosef got sick and he forgot a lot of his teachings. So, right, Rashi again. Thank you, Rashi, for that one. Rav Yosef chalav v'shakach talmudo v'kam midkar le Abaye talmido. Right. So now Abaye, who's Rav Yosef's Talmud, is reminding him, but you taught us this, Rabbi. Like, I know you got sick and you forgot, but you told us this. That's how we know this. Rav Yosef was blind and also renowned for his knowledge, and so when he, started losing his memory, that was a big hit for him. So, right? So then then Rabbi says, what do you explains what it means that he said it. Aha amar nihalan da amar Shmuel ein bitl reshut mechatzer lechatzer ben bitl reshut bechurba. So he said you mentioned in Shmuel several things. One, you said that you can't that a given courtyard can't negate from one to the other. Also, he says that you can't that similarly you can't negate your usage rights if you took a residence in a previously desolate, meaning unlit city that had nobody living in it. V'amart lan Allah ki amar Shmuel in bitl reshut mechatzer lechatzer lo amran ela shtei chatzerot upetach achad benehen aval zo lifnei mizu mitoch shas rim zeh al zeh mevatlin. Right? You mentioned that the case where you say you can't do bitl reshus is when you have is when you have different people in a region, right? That who don't necessarily have to make an eruv, but if they could make an eruv between them, but if they require to make an eruv, then you're allowed to do bittul, right? So it comes down to are you required to or not? That's what the difference is. So Amar Lai Ana Mina Mishmei Shmuel Hachi Hachi. So you're right. Like I did say that, but so then Vahamar Shmuel, but then Rav asks the question: In Lanu Be'er, then Ela Kalasha Mishnatenu on Shechatzera, low on Shechatzera. Says, well, then shouldn't we say the difference is between whether the people living in the Chatz again? When we say who's Mavatal, we could have been a dagger from the Mishnah too, because it says people live in the Chatzer, not who lived in the multiple Chatzers. Amar like Yemar Lan Ein Lanu Be'er, then Ela Kalasha Mishnatenu. Aha, Martlan. So then, no. Now, Beit is correcting Rav Yossi. He's like, no. It's not based on the Mishnah, which you're remembering. It's actually based on something else. It's rather the drasha that you're mentioning about Chatzer and Chatzerot isn't talking about our case, because he said that there is a scenario where there's two Chatzerot where you would be allowed to be mevatel one to the other one. So what is the case where you can't? Shehamavoy lechatzerot chatzer lebatim. Rather, what do we learn from Chatzer and Chatzerot? We learn that the relationship between the mavoy and the courtyards is similar to the case of the courtyards to the houses, meaning that you'd have to in order to get the final bittul, right? You have to do it in sequence, right? So the smallest unit being that of the houses. All the houses have to have become one, whether you're doing bittul or eruv. You have to have done it in sequence to become the subunits. So in order to make the eruv between a shita mevoot, each of the mavoys has to already have been metaken into an individual concrete allowed unit in order for the larger shita mevoot to work. Because we say that basically it's almost a direct port, that just like the relationship between every individual house and its courtyard is the same as every courtyard to the alleyway. Again, so it just says let's say there's two houses onto one courtyard and then two courtyards onto one alleyway. So each of the courtyards would have had to have had an eruv first. So now we're going to go back and reanalyze the statement of Shmuel, where he said about the question of are you allowed to be mevatel from one courtyard to another one. Kuf Amar Shmuel, ein bitl reshut mechatzer lechatzer, ein bitl reshut bechurva. So Shmuel says you can't be mevatel between two different chatzerot that aren't necessarily required to make an eruv with each other. And similarly, you can't be mevatel your rights if you took residence in a desolate area. So that's Shmuel's opinion. So the question is, so then we have Rabbi Yochanan argues. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, yesh bitl reshut mechatzer lechatzer, v'yesh bitl reshut bechurba. So Rabbi Yochanan says there is. Right? So that in both those cases. So utzricha. And we need to have both these cases listed in the machloket. Di'i ashminan mechatzer lechatzer, v'ha kamar Shmuel mishum, taha tashmishta lechud, v'ha tashmishta lechud. So I understand why from one chatzer to another chatzer you would need to have. It makes a difference. Why is there difference? Because by each chatzer they have different usage rights. So therefore, that's why you needed to clarify why that you can or can't make bittul between the two of them. But you may have said that Shmuel agrees to Rabbi Yochanan in the case of the churba, because for the churba is that again this was a previously unlived in abandoned city. So therefore, as soon as you came in, you two generated the area. So therefore, there's no difference rights because you both showed up and generate rights simultaneously. So you can't say that here. Or you could have said the reverse, that maybe you could have argued on similar logic that Rabbi Yochanan would say that in a chorba, because you do not have usage rights until you just showed up just now. So therefore, it would be different in the case of the two chatzerot, which already had the rights prior. So therefore, we need both statements of the chatzerot as well as the cases of the desolate city. Amar Bai. Had Amar Shmuel in Bittul Reshut Mechatzer Lechatzer Lo Amran Ela B'Shtei Chatzerot Upetach Achad Beneyan. Aval Shtei Chatzerot Zulif B'Mizu Mitol Sh'Osrim Mevatlin. So this is the statement of the only case where we have the issue is where they have different, is right where you're not allowed to do bittul is if they didn't necessarily have to go on through, but if they hadn't necessarily gone through, then that would not be the case. So now we're going to try to figure out why that is. Okay, Rava Amar Afilu Shtei Chatzerot Zolif Mizu Pamim Mevatlin Pamim Mevatlin. So Rava changes it a little bit, and he says that in the scenario where then in the case of two courtyards, one inside of the other one, sometimes they're mevatel and sometimes they're not mevatel. Sometimes they can and they can't. So even though we said before that if you have one courtyard that must get to the other courtyard, it'll always forbid the other courtyard, and therefore they all have to make an eruv together, and they also are allowed to do bittul one to another. But Rava is saying there's some cases where you can't. So now he's going to explain what he means. Okay, so what are the cases where you can versus you can't? Nanu Eruvin b'chitzona. So what happens is if one of the people living that here they put their eruv in the outer courtyard, but one of them forgot that he's part of the eruv, right? And this one is one of the people in the inner courtyard. So why is it great, right? And whether the person who forgot is from the inner courtyard to the outer courtyard. That'll create a problem. Both are forbidden now. Right? So again, this is where they put the eruv so the inner courtyard must walk through the outer courtyard, and you put the eruv there. So we say that's going to generate an issue. Not new eruvan b'pnimit v'shakach achad min ha'pnimit v'lo irev shtehen asturot. So similarly, if you had made the mistake of, again, if you place the eruv in the inner courtyard and one people from the inner courtyard forgot, that would also mean that you've got an issue because there's somebody from who's supposed to be part of the eruv didn't do it. But shakach achad min chitzona v'lo irev pnimit mutar v'chitzona asura. So, but if they had, the case that works out is that if let's say there's so the only person who forgot was somebody who lived in the outer courtyard. So theoretically, the inner courtyard can exclude the outer courtyard from in their making of the eruv, and therefore, if one of the people in the outer eruv forgot, then it wouldn't mean that the people in the inner courtyard can't carry. So that means the eruv would still be good. But not no eruvan b'chitzona v'shkakach echad bein min ha'pnimit bein min chitzona v'lo irev she'en asura. Right. But on the other hand, if you had placed it in the outer courtyard, so because the inner courtyard are going to be passing on through, so that one person who forgot, so there's no way to pretend that we're excluding an area where the person who's forbidding lives. There's no way to establish that. So therefore, that's why we have an issue. Hi bar pnimit laman nivatel. So now we're going to ask, who is he supposed to now that we're in this sticky situation of where somebody forgot to make an eruv but people still want to be able to carry and use the courtyard. How are we going to fix it? So the question is, this person who lived in the inner courtyard who made a mistake, who is he supposed to give up his rights to in order to make it good for everybody else? Lifto livnei pnimit leite lorev gabayo. If he is mevatel to somebody in the inner courtyard, the problem is the eruv isn't there. Right, because we said to place the eruv in the outer courtyard. So if you negate your rights, the person in the inner courtyard, well, the eruv isn't there, so you're not helping. So livto livnei chitzona, then let him make an eruv to the outer courtyard. Then let him relinquish his rights to the outer courtyard. So that way the eruv works there. We say ein bittul reshut mechatzer lechatzer. So you can't do that. Hi bar chitzona leman niftal. So then the person who lives in the outer courtyard, where should he negate to? Then liftal livnei chitzona. And then so then fine. So if somebody lived in the outer courtyard, we say let him negate to the outer courtyard. No, ika pnimit to astra alayu. No, but then we have the issue of the people in the inner courtyard are still forbidding the people in the outer courtyard. So you didn't solve anything. So liftal livnei pnimit. So then, the person who lives in the outer courtyard negate to the people in the inner courtyard. We said ein bittul reshut v'chatzer lechatzer. Right, so therefore we're stuck in that situation because there's nobody who you can properly negate to without somebody else. Because when you do bittul erev, you have to be and you're being vatal your reshus. It has to be to a single individual who will, but you can't do it to an individual who after you negate to that individual, it will still be forbidden because if that's the case, then you are stuck. So not no Eruvin mimit, v'shaka chad mimit v'lo irev shtei nasura. So now we're going to go back and discuss another case where if one person from the inner courtyard forgot and didn't make an eruv and wasn't part of the eruv, then both courtyards are forbidden. So hi bar pnimit laman nivtol. So then we're saying, wait. So then who could he be involved to? Could we possibly solve that case? Liftol v'nei pnimit. So shouldn't he be involved to the person who lived in the inner one, ika chitzona de astar layu. So, but the problem is people in the outer courtyard, which are also part of the eruv, would forbid that. So lifta livnei chitzona. Then he should negate to the people in the outer courtyard. I would say no, because ein bittul reshut mechatzer lechatzer. No, that can't work because you can't be vatal from one reshut to another reshut. Again, sorry for this. This is a little confusing back and forth, but. So that we're playing around with being mevatel reshut, and you can't be mevatel your usage rights to somebody who it won't work afterwards. So that's why this is getting so complicated. Right? We're trying to think, could you do it? But the problem is that each time somebody else forbids it from the other person. So shaka chachad minich. So now the next case. Okay, now we're on BAYT. We're gonna hopefully get to the two dots, and then we'll pick up from there tomorrow. I think maybe we might want to start at 6:30 instead. That way, if people want to head to the 7:30 and are staying at home, they can make it here on time. I'll send out an email to that effect. Don't worry. So shaka chachad min hachitzona v'lo irev v'adai pnimit muteret. So if somebody from the outer courtyard had forgotten, so then the answer is they're actually in good shape because the inner courtyard is definitely going to be allowed. To achda, dasha, mishtamsha, chitzon, mishtamsha, because everybody is living in that inside area can join together as one, and we can ignore the outer courtyard. Right, so that's the case where it'll be fine. Where somebody living in where the eruv is placed in the again, this is where the eruv is placed in the inner courtyard, but somebody in the outer courtyard forgot. So we say that it's going to work because. The inner courtyard works, and we can fully exclude the person from the outer courtyard without a problem. And then v'chitzon asura, and the outer one will be forbidden because, could be because he forgot, and things will work out well. Again, not good for the person in the outer courtyard, but at least people in the inner courtyard can have salvage their eruv. So Amar layer of Huna Brader of Yeshua Larava, So now the question is, I don't understand. Why, if somebody from the inner courtyard forgot and didn't make an eruv, does that answer both of them? Liftal bar pnimit, livnei pnimit, v'tetzi chitzona, v'tishtere bahadayu. So it's like, wait, why can't we just do a multi-stage bittul? Right? This whole thing we're doing until now assumes that you can only do bittul once, and if that doesn't work, that's it. Why can't we say that the inner person is mevatel to the other inner person, who's then mevatel to the person who lives in the outside chatzer? Can't we just do it like that? So come on, Rabbi Eliezer. This week, Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. And what's Rabbi Eliezer's opinion? Rabbi Eliezer's opinion is as follows: To Amar enot sarich levatel reshut lekol echad ve'echad. Because Rabbi Eliezer says you don't need to be mevatel reshut to every individual; rather, you do it once. Right? So again, you're right. According to Eliezer, that would be an option because he says if you mevatel to one person, that's enough. But the problem is that we're following the opinion that you have to be mevatel the Rabbanan that when you do bittul, you to be mevatel to everybody all at once. So if you can't be mevatel to everybody all at once, then your bittul doesn't work. So in this case, right, so to explain the now, the reason why we said is that I can't be mevatel to the other person in the inner courtyard, and why that's not going to work if the person in the outer courtyard is involved, is because I can only choose one person, right? And that's why as in I can only be mevatel once, and I can't be mevatel to two different areas, and that's the problem. Because, right, so that's why we generate the issue. But when you're allowed, but if you're allowed, if you only need to be mevatel just to one person, but then do to other person, then that would solve our issue with almost all these cases we've been talking about until now. So that's why there's the difference between Rabbi Elazar, who says you don't need to to negate yourself to every single person. Therefore, you could do a multi-tiered. One negates the other to A to B, and then B to C, which would then make it all into one region and all allowed. But according to the opinion that you can't do that, you have to at the same time, again, the person that C has to negate at the same time to B and A. Then if B and A are in different chatzerot, that would not work because you can't negate from one courtyard to another courtyard. Okay?
Question. Practically speaking, what was the mechanism? Chatzer Pnimi makes their own Eruv altogether, and then the Chatzer Hitzon makes their own Eruv, and then they make another one to join the two.
Not necessarily. In this case, they're all doing it. They're doing it all together because the outer courtyard can't make their own individual eruv. Meaning, because the outer courtyard's eruv, if they don't have the people in the inner courtyard as part of it, their eruv is worthless.
Right. Okay.
So, as in, right, they could try to make they all given together, but as in they would need, as in it wouldn't go into effect because they need the people in the inner courtyard, or theirs is nothing.
They have to. They have no choice. They have to go through the outer
courtyard. Correct.
Right.
But the inner courtyard could make their own, and just simply leave the people in the outer courtyard high and dry. Wouldn't be nice, but they could.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So again, tomorrow we're going to try starting at 6:30. That way, everybody can hopefully, in case the daf is a little bit longer, and they'll be really have plenty of time to get to shul for the 7:30 minyan, if they so desire. Okay.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Have a good day.
My pleasure. Take care.
Bye.